Here is the mandate. Seems to me that we're doing something already thanks to Anne and Jane with local art. You can see it on display already around us. It's something which I recollect happening in the province many years ago, in the 70s, where it was thought the province should get involved in acquiring art to show who we were and where we've been. Excellent idea. Clearly it's a question of developing our knowledge and our understanding. And the way we would present this sort of stuff is to show that this is where Sechelt sits within the regional district of the Sunshine Coast in British Columbia. It's a question of building the community relative to who we are and our demographic profile. Like the other studies, other studios and art galleries have been investigated elsewhere. And we come to where we are now, moving into the cultural centre. Rapid growth in our population, many new residents with high skills, quite a bit of frustration because of this absence of a cultural focal point. The concept that at this point in time little coordination occurs, and that there needs to be somewhere in the long haul that becomes municipal in its perspective. I think this concept of interaction is occurring right here and now. It's the sort of thing one could see happening in the cultural complex, and it should not be overestimated as to what it can do. So we're changing, we're growing. Our population within the districts of Sechelt is approaching 10,000. Many residents have expressed concerns about where we are going with respect to culture and art. And there is a sense in some parts that it's been overlooked. Swimming pools have been built and recreational centres have been built, and arts and culture have been happily ignored. So here again we go through the same calculations as before. As I said, this is the most modest of all the proposals. We've talked to the gaps already, so I won't particularly labour this. But it seems to me if we're going for this kind of development, a cultural complex, the very words suggest that everything is brought together and therefore it can work together. We've talked about why the demand is there, and again I won't labour this, but the demand is clearly there, although sometimes very difficult to measure. One has a sense that if things were built, things would happen. But the case for bringing these together is not this cooperation only. It's about increased visibility. It's about, because of sharing space, you can save space. It's about sharing parking, you can save parking. It's about sharing a site, you can save site space. It's like sharing a loading dock, which is so fundamental to each of these components. But to me, as an architect, architecture will make this project. And I'm not talking about the wild architecture that you see in museums in Toronto and other places east. I'm talking of architecture that will act as a focal point for our community and begin to say we have at last reached an age of maturity where this is appreciated. So, we look at what we've seen. Probably one of the best models, but not architecturally. I know this quite well. The Yukon Arts Centre has a lot of stuff that is very defensible, but it's very much a very... I know the firm of architects. When I was at UBC, I used to reckon I hired two kinds of architects. One was Arthur Erickson, who I sent to sleep once, you should know. He was just back from Saudi Arabia and he was tired. That was his excuse. Where you would get architects wanting to build glorious edifices to their memory. Or I have other architects then who build very functional buildings that work very well and don't leak, unlike Arthur's, but tend to give you very dull architecture. And indeed, the architect who did this was one of the architects who did a similar building for me at UBC. But if you're looking at what this is right now, I think this would have cost $40 million now. And this is a community within the town, within the Whitehorse itself is only 20,000 people at the time it was built. Clearly, having a centre of art would certainly enhance the thriving art community of our coast. And I'm glad that Rita Guzek has had something to say too. Clearly, Anne and Jane should be thanked very much for bringing this to the fore of our moment here in this room. So, this is where you put things in your ears because you don't want to hear the price. If we were to go for everything, exclusive of a site and parking, 50 million wouldn't be an unreasonable figure. It's a colossal amount of money. Although if you look at what they're building at UBC, I mean, it's nothing. This is a drop in a bucket. If you look at 30 years and you look at the staging, you may find it will take 30 years to spend the 50 million, even though it may get inflated over the years. We could start with as little as maybe 2.5 million, if we have a site. Likewise, we have a range of building areas that relate to the cost. And this may well be the most controversial moment of the presentation. I worked for some years in the Ministry of Education as Director of Facilities Planning, and I travel the province supposedly helping school districts to plan their schools. So I know a little bit about how you do enrollment projections. This school district is going to have a very stable enrollment from about a high of 4,600 in about 1999 to about 3,300 now, to roughly 3,300 10 years hence. Please spare a moment for Mr. I.M. Pye. Now, hands up, who knows Mr. I.M. Pye? Not, oh, 2 or 3, thank you. Well, he's a very nice chap. He was born in China, in Suzhou, and he has built some remarkable buildings, not the least of which is the pyramid at the Louvre in Paris. He's also built the National Gallery in Washington. He's a very old gentleman. There's a wonderful, actually, PBS documentary about him, if ever you get a chance to see it. He said he was longing to do this museum in Suzhou, which has got a kind of Venice kind of quality to it, but nothing like Venice. The municipal fathers said to him, now Mr. Pye, if you're going to design a modern building, we're not sure about it, we would like it to be in the Suzhou style. Now, if you said this to me as an architect, I would cringe. I want to build buildings that fit in, but I'm not really interested in building the Sechelt style, shall we say. So I could imagine Mr. Pye somersaulting and saying, what can I do? And he replied that he was now 90, he'd been trained in Harvard, rubbed shoulders with Walter Gropius and all those sort of guys. He wanted to build a building that was modern, but he said, I want it to be about the future. I want the Suzhou Museum to be about the future while having reference to the past. And I really think that's what has to be said about Sechelt as well. So, if we look at all our users in our community complex, what are their commonalities when it comes to a site? They want visibility and high profile in one location. There's got to be enough land. It's got to have a benefit to the community by way of how it impacts the neighbourhoods or the commercial areas. It's got to have access to parking, very important. Cost and ownership is a question. Cost of construction is an issue. If you build it in the sticks, there'll be, when I was in the ministry, this is a long time ago, we were coughing up in Surrey $1 million a school for sewer and water to get it to the school site, just to get it there. So clearly the case for building it near where you are, like across the road here, is very strong. It's got to reach planning goals of the municipality, regional planning goals, economic goals, and frankly, as my wife will now tell you this last few months, it has to be a flat site. I like flat sites. And I think it has to be close to restaurants and shopping, and certainly if you're bringing in people who are in the entertainment biz, it's got to be near to hotels and motels. It's got to have infrastructure availability, and it would be great if the bus could stop right outside it. And then there's the issue of sustainability. Now, the tragedy about sustainability is it is a front-end capital cost. And dreams get dashed as soon as you start tendering. But nonetheless, one should always try. Now, isn't this interesting? The site size we need, based on the zoning bylaw, the Public Assembly zoning bylaw of the District of Sechelt, is 5.5 acres. Guess how big the Sechelt Elementary School site is? It's just a smidgen under 6 acres. So, there you go. We talked about the neighbourhood of learning. Sorry, I'm going on a bit. This is a concept of the Ministry of Education. I don't know whether we can actually relate to this. It's not easy because they see it still predominantly an educational function. Even though there have been proposals in Revelstoke for a 275-seat community theatre as part of one of these, as well as a secondary school and an elementary school. And all in this Revelstoke project is 53 million. So my proposal for 50 million is not out of line with. I've actually held this watercolour by Frank Rattenbury, Rats, they called it. He submitted in the competition for the Parliament building his nom de plume, a BC architect. I mean, come on now. Talk about trying to load the odds. But this was his perspective. It was built almost like this. But can you imagine them looking at this when they were in what was called the bird cages? I mean, what a leap of faith. And World War I was almost upon them. You know, what an incredible leap. And I think that's what I'm seeing here. So, apart from Mr. Pye, I wanted to remind you that elsewhere in British Columbia, there has been this leap of faith that has been taken, and we now accept it as the norm. We visit Victoria and see this, thinking it's been there a long, long time. I took this picture at Sandy Hook, from Sandy Hook. If you ignore the 21st century plastic, it's not much different from what was here 100 years ago, or even now. So thank you for listening. I'd be happy to answer questions if you wish. Thank you very much.